Good morning. I am Molly Brinkerhoff, today's worship associate. Welcome to this June morning. We gather to worship, our hearts alive with hope that here we will be truly seen, that here we will be welcomed into the garden of this community, where the simple and the elegant, the fluted and the frilled, the shy and the dramatic complement one another and are treasured. May we know that here each contributes in their own way to the beauty of the whole. Come, let us worship together, all genders, sexualities, politics, clappers and non-clappers, progressive or conservative. May we root ourselves in the values of this faith, compassion and courage, transcendence, justice, and transformation. We have a few weekly announcements today. Again, if you're able, please sign into the chat box so we know who is joining us. We will be having joys, sorrows, and concerns today, so if you haven't emailed them to us already, please put them into the chat box now. Men's group will be meeting this Friday on June 11th, never mind. But we are, the Philosophical Society is tentatively planning on having the next meeting on Thursday, June 24th, here at the church. The proposed topic is Truth and Politics by Hannah Arendt. I hope I didn't mess that name up. Another really, really important and exciting message is that we are reopening on August 1st. Our reopening task force has met several times over the last few months, monitoring the state of the COVID-19 pandemic on a local and national level, to determine when to resume in-person services and how to make sure this is done in a safe fashion. And we are pleased to announce, I am on that task force, that we will resume in-person services on April 1st, with Reverend Kevin doing the sermon that day, unless there are new developments over the summer that force us to reconsider. Hopefully not. Also here is the 2021 General Assembly program book. It is now available for viewing and download, so check it out. See if there's about 100 pages of program listings, messages from advertisers, and helpful information about General Assembly. And there's a lot of can't miss events, and that will actually be our fourth service in the month of June, will be the General Assembly worship service. And lastly, while we no longer have offering time during the service, it is still important nonetheless. We would be grateful for any donations that we can receive to support us. Just go to our website to click the Give button, and we thank you for your support. Excuse me. Sorry, I had a little tickle. We will now move into our sacred time of worship. The flower breath. Imagine smelling a flower or a rose. Breathe in through your nose and then out through your mouth, as though to move the flower softly in the wind. Think of your breath as I ring the peace bowl 3 times. We will begin our service with our prelude. Our church covenant was decided upon by a group of members from this congregation. Our covenant, along with our 7 Unitarian Universalist principles, is our guide to how our congregation will relate to each other and the world. Even though we cannot be together physically at the moment, I believe it is still important that we read our covenant together. As I read our church covenant for all, please recite it from home with me. Love is the spirit of this community, and service its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. We will now be lighting our chalice, and I invite you to light a chalice of your own if you have one available. Our chalice lighting words for today are from the Buddha. As we light the chalice, reflect on his words. If we could see the miracle of a single flower, clearly our whole life would change.
Good morning. Our call to worship this morning is the poem Sometimes by Hermann Hesse, translated by Robert Bly. Sometimes when a bird cries out, or the wind sweeps through a tree, or a dog howls in a far-off farm, I hold still and listen a long time. My soul turns and goes back to the place where 1,000 forgotten years ago, the bird and the blowing wind were like me and were my brothers. My soul turns into a tree and an animal and a cloud bank. Then changed and awed, it comes home and asks me questions. What should I reply? June is Pride Month for the LGBTQ+ community. So today we want to acknowledge this with a special video message from the Colors of Pride initiative featuring the Reverend Manish Mishra Marzetti.
Greetings. I'm the Reverend Manish Mishra Marzetti, serving as Senior Minister of the First Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Ann Arbor, Michigan. I'm also an openly gay pastor and a dad in a multiracial family. These pandemic days that we have been navigating have really forced me, and perhaps you as well, to think deeply and well about the things that are in our circle of care. What are we bringing our attention and love to? What are we allowing in that circle of care? For me, it is an increasing awareness of how we as a human family have really deeply otherized one another and created divisions that are ultimately harming us collectively, creating harm on a large scale through the disconnecting from one another, through the blaming of one another, through the invective that we are labeling at one another. Now, this is not to say that there are not behaviors, forms of oppression that are atrocious, and those things do exist. But we have work to do ourselves within our houses of worship, within the local communities that we've chosen to belong to look carefully at how we are bringing alive our ethic, our commitment to love and care, as every denomination, every religious flavor that we can look toward calls us to do, to live into love and compassion and care for one another. Now, the times we're in, you know as well as I do, trying to universally bring that alive everywhere, that may be too lofty of a goal in these times, but certainly in the communities we've chosen to belong to, we've chosen to be there for good reason. We've found resonance. We have found ethics and an approach that deeply resonates with us, spiritual values that speak to who we are. Those are the places to begin. Those are the places to begin looking at, what does inclusivity look like here? Who isn't a part of my community but living nearby? I wonder why. I wonder why some folks don't choose to be a part of our community and choose to be parts of other communities. How can we, whoever that we is, whatever group, community it might be, how can we expand beyond who we are today to live more deeply into open-heartedness and love and care? How can we build sustained, ongoing relationships across difference? Here too, we can get caught up in trying to do the pie in the sky, the hardest thing first. How do we even just build up relationship, ongoing sustained relationship with other like-minded communities or groups or people that are committed to the same types of transformation and growth, embodiment of spiritual goodness, good-heartedness that we ourselves are. Healing the divisions across the globe or in our nation as a whole might be a very grand ideal that we continue to strive towards, and we should not lose our commitment to build better right where we are, right wherever our feet find us, whichever communities and groups we're moving within. The intersection of LGBTQIA+, the longing in that alphabet of communities to live into the fullness of dignity, equality, justice. That longing echoed in other communities throughout our nation. Black communities, Latinx communities, many other communities, often intersecting as people holding a multiplicity of identities find their way into our lives and into our local houses of worship. How do we honor that multiplicity of experience without trying to change the other person? How do we honor ourselves across difference, stepping into true authenticity, integrity, and inclusiveness? It begins with each and every one of us striving to be that presence, encouraging and inviting others close to us within group or community to live into the same. Be the transformation our culture, our society, our world needs. It rests with each and every one of us to do what we can right where we are.
I now invite you to join in singing our opening hymn, number 76, For Flowers That Bloom About Our Feet.
For flowers that bloom about our feet, for tender grass so fresh and sweet, for song of bird and hum of bee, for all things fair we hear or see, Giver of all we thank thee. For blue of stream and blue of sky, for pleasant shade of branches high, for fragrant air and cooling breeze, for beauty of the blooming trees, Giver of all we thank thee. For this new morning with its light, for rest and shelter of the night, for health and food, for love and friends, for everything thy goodness sends, Giver of all we thank thee.
Today's Time for All Ages is The Best Meal from Creating Home and Tapestry of Faith, read by Elizabeth Coyote, Director of Lifespan Faith Development. Once there was a great chef who was famous throughout the land. She was so good she taught other people how to cook, and their food was almost as tasty as hers. Just for fun, she would throw fancy dinner parties once a month. Everyone wanted to be invited to these dinners. For these dinners, she would instruct the student chefs to cook new and extravagant dishes. The dinner guests, in awe of the chef's skills, would spend the dinner savoring each bite. All you would hear would be quiet little oohs and ahs. Because she always wanted to feature new goodies to eat at all her parties, she would travel far and wide all over the land to experience new food. Everywhere she went, the town would honor her. The best cooks would create dishes unique to their region. The great chef tasted them all and requested the recipes of the dishes she liked best. As you can imagine, she ate a lot of food and knew a great deal about how to prepare the best meals. One evening, while traveling home, the chef stopped at a small country house to ask for directions to a hotel. The family insisted that she spend the night with them. Happily, she was in time for dinner. The mother took a casserole out of the oven. Brother tossed a salad with different vegetables. Sister sliced the bread. "Let me help," said the chef, so she set the table for the four of them. When everyone was seated at the table, the family held hands. The chef felt the young sister's hand slip into hers, and the chef, in turn, reached out for the brother's hand. The mother said, "To have food upon the table," and the children replied, "is a blessing." The mother said, "The sunset and the possibility of another sunrise tomorrow is a blessing," the children replied. "The love of family, the warmth of friendship, and the grace of the Spirit is a blessing," the children and the chef replied together. Then they laughed, happy that the chef had joined in their grace. They ate, and during the meal everyone told stories about their day. The chef could not believe how delicious the food was. She didn't want dinner to end. All things must end, however, and off to bed the children went. "May I have the recipes?" the chef asked the mother, who was flattered that the chef had so enjoyed their simple meal. In the morning, the chef rode on towards home. When she got home, she went straight to the kitchen, gave the young chefs the recipes, and told them to start preparation for a dinner party tomorrow night. Tomorrow came, the guests arrived, and the casserole, salad, and bread were served. The chef took a bite and chewed. Something was wrong. Something was missing. This was not like the meal she had had at the farmhouse. She ordered the students to explain what they had done differently, but they promised they had only followed the recipes. So she sent someone to go to the farmhouse to bring the mother to her house. The mother came, and the chef asked her what missing ingredient had she left out of the recipe. "What's missing cannot fit into a recipe," she replied. "Did you and your guests make the meal together? Did you hold fast to each other while giving thanks? Did you share your stories during the meal?" "No," the chef replied. "None of that had happened." Then the chef realized that sharing a meal together, what we call breaking bread together, was about more than just eating good food. It was about working together, sharing lives, and sharing laughs. It was about being thankful for the food, not because it was fancy or the best, but because being together to enjoy the food would nourish you, your family, and your friends. After that, the chef decided to give small, intimate dinner parties. She and her guests would work together with the student chefs, and they would all sit together, give thanks, and enjoy the very best of meals. The end.
Ours is a welcoming community where we find connection, a spiritual community where we find meeting. Ours is a sharing community where our joys are amplified, a caring community where our sorrows are lessened. We take this moment to reflect on our joys, sorrows, and concerns, to acknowledge the mutual support of our community. I will now read the joys, concerns, and sorrows we received, and Reverend Kevin will light a candle for each. My first one is from Reverend Kevin himself. After a decade of protests, court actions, and political shifts, the Keystone XL pipeline project is now officially dead. It is a hard-fought victory for environmental activists and the rights of Indigenous people. We also have a joy from Victoria McDonald. For the past 21 years, the roadless rule in Alaska has been disputed. For the next 4 years, forests in Alaska are protected from unneeded roading. Hallelujah. We have another joy from Lisa Christensen. I'm heading east tomorrow to visit friends and family whom I've not seen in 2 years, including a new grandniece and grandnephew. So excited. Well, we wish you safe journey. And another joy from Allison McCready. The Bridge Group is going to meet again at the Senior Citizen Center, and Alan McCready is really looking forward to it. That's really great, Alan. I'm glad that they're starting up again. May we remember those who have spoken, those they have named, and those who hold silence in our hearts.
Our reading this morning is an excerpt from the book The Necessity of Empty Places by Paul Gruchow. Almost everybody has learned in some elementary biology lesson that the lichens are a classic example of symbiosis, that a lichen is not one form of life, but two, a fungus and an alga, which somehow in an ancient age discovered the mutual advantage of sharing resources. The alga, its ability to manufacture carbohydrates, the fungus, its skill at collecting and holding water in certain minerals. But the spectacular success of this arrangement has eluded the myth makers who give us our metaphors for life. We are steadfastly committed to seeing the process of life as a competition. Everywhere we look in nature, we see battles for survival, wars for territory, contest for domination, the fight for possession of limited resources. We speak of these in terms not just about ourselves, but about all life, plants, as well as animals. We say that in a given ecosystem, this or that plant is dominant, that one plant replaces another by invasion, that the transition from one kind of community to another is a succession, a term that calls to mind the progressions of royalty. We talk about the food chain, a hierarchical order in which something bigger or more aggressive is always consuming something smaller or more passive. The language of biology is often as violent as that of geology is romantic. But this is not because the facts of biology inevitably lead toward violent or combative conclusions. The instances of cooperation in nature surely equal those of competition. For every predator-prey story, there is a lichen story. If we were meeting in person today, we would now be celebrating a flower communion ritual by exchanging flowers with one another. It is one of my favorite rituals performed in almost every UU congregation. The flower communion or celebration was created by the Reverend Norbert Chopik, who is also the founder of the Unitarian Church in Czechoslovakia, as a way to celebrate communion among people of many beliefs. It was first celebrated in Prague on June 4th, 1923. The ritual was brought to America in 1940 by the Reverend Maya Chopik, Norbert's wife. Since this is a virtual service today, we've created a slideshow of flower photos sent in by many of you. So please now enjoy the flowers and music. don't know when I first learned about lichens, but it was at a very early age. I honestly can't remember not knowing about lichens, and they have fascinated me ever since. I even made lichens the subject of my 5th grade science fair project, and I still have a lichen identification app on my phone. As part of my science fair project, one of my experiments was to make flour from parboiled reindeer lichen and bake it into a crude biscuit, part of which I consumed. Reindeer lichen, or reindeer moss, actually refers to 2 similar species of lichens with the scientific names Cladonia rangiferina and Cladonia portentosa. And like most all lichens, they are edible. There are a few species of lichens that are poisonous, though. Reindeer lichen is so named because it is the primary food source for reindeer and caribou in the Arctic. It has also been consumed for food and medicinal purposes by Arctic peoples for millennia. From my own experience, let me just say that I would have to be desperately hungry to eat reindeer lichen for sustenance. The evolutionary story of lichens has been quite successful, and these extremely hardy life forms have adapted to life in some of Earth's harshest conditions. There's an incredible variety of lichen species, and they occupy almost every ecosystem on Earth, from the tropics and deserts to the Arctic, and from sea level to the highest summits. They can thrive in places with extreme variations in temperature and moisture. I was looking at a photo I took several years ago of the U.S. Geological Survey marker on the summit of Mount Washington in New Hampshire, and I could identify at least 2 different species of crustose lichens in the photo. One naturalist remarked that he would not be surprised if, when the end comes for our planet, the last living thing on Earth was a lichen. If you get interested in lichens and want to start looking for them, they are probably one of the easiest forms of life to locate. Just look at the forest floor on about any tree, rotten log, or rock in nature, and you will likely see several species of the 3 main groups. There are the flat crustose lichens that cover exposed rocks and trees, often looking more like splashes of gray, pale green, and even orange paint than a living organism. Then there are the foliose lichens that cover the limbs of trees and shrubs with a flaky layer that sometimes reminds me of tiny lettuce leaves. And lastly, there are the more 3-dimensional fruticose lichens, such as the familiar reindeer moss that in the northern forest and tundra, and the old man's beard lichen that hangs from the limbs of trees in the coastal south. There are at least 3,600 species in North America alone, and new species are being discovered almost every year. What has always fascinated me about lichens, as most of us learned in school, is how these organisms were actually 2 very ordinary forms of life, an alga and a fungus, living in a cooperative relationship known as symbiosis. The fungus supplies the physical structure, and the alga provides the production of food through photosynthesis. The incredible diversity we see in lichens is a result of the specific alga and fungus involved. And as it turns out, in only the last few years, we have learned that lichens are even more complex than scientists had understood for over 150 years. In 2011, 2 biologists in Montana, Toby Spribble and John McCutcheon, began studying the genetics of 2 common local species of lichens that were found in the forests. Although the genetics indicated that each contained the same species of fungus and alga, one of the lichens was yellow and produced a strong poison called vulpinic acid, while the other was dark brown and did not produce the toxin. This did not make sense. What was going on? When you look at a cross-section of a lichen, it has been described as looking like a loaf of ciabatta bread with complex layers of flakes, crusts, and pockets. As they looked closely at the layers of the 2 lichens, what Spribble and McCutcheon found was that there were actually 2 species of fungus present in addition to the alga. One was from the group known as Ascomycetes, and the other from the group known as Basidiomycetes. It was the fungus from the latter group that determined whether or not the toxic acid would be produced. So forget what you learned in school. We now know that most lichens are actually a trio of organisms living in symbiosis. But wait, there's more. Further research by other scientists in the last few years has discovered that there are a variety of bacteria species embedded in the ciabatta structure of lichens. In some cases, over 800 species of bacteria in a single lichen. They had been thought to be incidental squatters, but they are now believed to be a necessary component of the lichen biome as a whole. It is amazing how much new knowledge has emerged in only the last decade about such supposedly simple organisms. We can only guess what secrets lichens have yet to reveal. They're turning out to be much more complicated than we used to imagine. No matter how many organisms are involved, a symbiotic relationship is the essential feature of lichens. And this is only one example in a world filled with complex relationships between living organisms. The more we learn about ecosystems, the more intricate and interdependent the world appears. And we too are derivative of this world of interdependence. We cannot produce the oxygen we breathe, nor can we synthesize sunlight, soil, and water into food that our bodies can consume. We are not even capable of digesting our food without a veritable army of microorganisms that dwells within our digestive tract. Every moment of our lives is a testament to the necessity of cooperation and interdependence. Cooperation and degrees of social organization is common among animals, birds, insects, and even some simple organisms like amoebas. Kinship groups form bonds within many species, and especially among mammals. But it would be disingenuous to suggest that nature is all about cooperation and ignore the reality of predator-prey relationships. Nature presents a never-ending display of violence and death in the struggle to survive. And these relationships are just as critical to the sustainability of ecosystems. What is important, I think, is to maintain an awareness of this both-and reality. And when we look at the human experience, it is important to acknowledge the predator-prey story of our human ancestry. It is probable that the earliest cooperation among our human ancestors was centered on the need to work together as hunters, as predators. They learned that cooperation and coordination with their fellow hominids was a more effective way to kill other animals. But human beings are more than just biological beings. We are not only shaped by the forces of nature, we are shaped by our culture and history in a complex dynamic. It is thought, for example, that human language and our larger brains co-evolved over time. That human language and our larger brains, language led to larger brains, which led to more complex language, and so on. And as we developed the capacity for symbolic thinking, we began to wonder about the meaning of our own mortality. And about 40 to 50 million years ago, in what anthropologists call the Great Leap Forward, human behavior and thinking seems to have abruptly changed, and the earliest forms of art and music appeared, as well as the first strong evidence of religious thinking and ritual. This led to significant changes in social structures and cooperation with others beyond the immediate kinship relations. Over time, local family groups became tribes with distinct languages and cultures, and with the advent of agriculture, more settled patterns and even larger populations emerged, bringing forth greater intellectual and cultural advances. More and more, human development was no longer left to the mercy of natural forces. We became co-creators of our own destiny. But sometime during the more recent centuries of this journey of evolution, We seem to have forgotten our inherent dependence on the web of life. In many of our religious traditions, our perceived special status as human beings made us think we were no longer part of nature, and that the natural world was simply a resource we could use with impunity. The metaphorical language of competition and domination fits nicely within such a worldview. But humanity is beginning to realize that this old worldview no longer makes sense in a world facing the realities of climate change, rapid population growth, and the unsustainable use of resources. We need to find our way to a better worldview, a narrative based in the recognition of mutual interdependence and cooperation. In short, we need lichen stories. We need stories where nationalism is replaced by a focus on the global community. Stories where success is not measured by being the winner and accumulating power and personal wealth, but with the degree of sustainability and sharing. Stories that recognize the importance and necessity of cooperation. These are the kinds of stories that can change the world and set us on a course to healing. And there are some lichen stories to be found already. Archbishop Desmond Tutu of South Africa often talks about the Bantu concept of Ubuntu, which is usually translated as human kindness, but is really more nuanced. There's an inherent sense of the universal human connection between people. Tutu suggests a more accurate sense of the word is, I am because we are. None of us exists in isolation. We are born into relationships and remain in relationships. Ubuntu, I am because we are. What a wonderful truth to acknowledge. I'm also reminded of a similar thought expressed by the Catholic priest and philosopher Pierre de Teilhard de Chardin, who wrote, "Driven by the forces of love, the fragments of the world seek each other, so that the world may come into being." It is a lovely thought. And I think he was mostly right in this idea. But I think we are learning that we never really were fragments to begin with. We seek each other because we recognize our unity in some deep unconscious level. That sense of Ubuntu, I am because we are. For some people, I think there's a fear that embracing this interdependence with each other and with all forms of life will somehow lessen our individual importance, that we will no longer be special and uniquely created in the image of God. But recognizing our interdependence does not mean the dissolution of individuality. Like the varieties of individual species that combine to form a lichen, each serving a unique role, it is the uniqueness and diversity of personalities and talents that each of us brings to the table as individual human beings that combines to make our communities stronger. And as for being special, how about the fact that our species is the only known example of life growing into self-awareness and understanding the size and age of the universe? Though we are earthbound creatures in a small corner of the universe, just think about how much we have learned over the last few thousand years about our cosmic origins and the wonders of creation and the substance of life. With all due respect to lichens, I also like to think that most people have an intellectual awareness that is far greater than lichens. And so we have a special responsibility to consider the meaning of interdependence. Lichens have evolved to simply be that way, but we need to understand the ramifications and make appropriate ethical choices. We can no longer pretend that we are something apart from nature, simply stewards of a world created for our use. We are utterly connected to the earth. And the sooner we acknowledge this, the sooner we can begin to heal ourselves and the wounds we have inflicted on nature. It is time to not only accept, but bask in the truth that dust thou art, and to dust thou returnest. The seventh principle of our Unitarian Universalist faith affirms our respect for the interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part. Living this principle into being is a good example of a lichen story. And like we are discovering about lichens, there are new truths to discover about what interdependence and cooperation truly means every day. Let us celebrate our place within this mutual web of interdependence with a sense of profound gratitude and humility. I invite you now to join in our closing hymn, number 355, We Lift Our Hearts in Thanks.
We lift our hearts in thanks today for all the gifts of life, and first for peace that turns away the enmities of strife, and next the beauty of the earth for flowers and lovely things. The spring's great miracle of birth with sound of songs and wings. Then harvests of its teeming soil in orchard, grove, and field, but more the service and the toil of those who helped them yield, and most the gifts of hope and love, of wisdom, truth, and right, the gifts that shine like stars above to chart the world by night.
Our closing words are the poem The Clearing Rests in Song and Shade by Wendell Berry. The clearing rests in song and shade. It is a creature made by old light held in soil and leaf, by human joy and grief, by human work, fidelity of sight and stroke, by rain, by water on the parent stone. We join our work to heaven's gift, our hope to what is left, that field and woods at last agree in an economy of wildest worth. High heaven's kingdom come on earth. Imagine paradise. O dust, arise.
We will now extinguish our chalice with the following words. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. Please be sure to join us for our after-service coffee hour. See you in a few minutes.